Welcome back. This is Talking Politics, and we've been interviewing the MP for East Ham and the Shadow Minister for Employment, the Right Honourable Stephen Timms. You're very welcome, sir.
Thank you, Wilma.
Now, you are the Labour Party's envoy and chair of Christians on the left. And in your own words, I quote, you said the early Labour Party had deep roots in the church and the influence of faith remains with us today. Now, tell us some of this influence.
Well, looking at the history, it's very clear the great majority of, for example, the first Labour MPs who were elected in the early part of the 20th century were very committed Christians, people who'd been active in their chapels, worshipping alongside other working people, perhaps in the mines, in the factories, wherever it had been. And they were the people who founded the Labour Party and gave it its start. I chair the organisation, as you say, Christians on the Left, which is affiliated to the Labour Party. It's an organisation of Labour Party members and supporters who are Christians and for whom faith in Christ is the starting point for their politics. And we have representatives at the Labour Party conference every year. We work to point out to the party the importance and the value of what the churches are doing around the UK, and also to encourage people in the churches to support the Labour Party. Ed Miliband as leader, he's not a person of faith, he's not a member of our organisation, but he's been very supportive to our organisation. I think he looks around Britain and sees what a big part today the churches are playing, what a positive part the churches are playing, and recognises that our party wants to get behind churches that are making such a big and positive impact in their communities.
What plan does Ed Miliband have for religious freedom?
Well, we've announced, Ed has announced, and Douglas Alexander, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has spelt this out, that if we're elected, Ed, as Prime Minister, would appoint an envoy for religious freedom who reported directly to Ed Miliband as Prime Minister, and whose task it would be, on behalf of the British government, to lobby for religious freedom around the world and to take action when religious freedom is at threat. And we receive a lot of reports these days about Christians being persecuted around the world. Persecution is affecting more Christians than members of any other faith group around the world at the moment, and it would be the job of this envoy to press for that persecution to end and to work for Christians and people of other faiths around the world to be able to worship freely.
As the chair of Christians on the Left, you're a Christian and you're in politics. Now, what role do Christians have in politics?
Well, I think it's a very big role. Of course, people often say you shouldn't mix up faith and politics, and if you do, you're asking for trouble. And they point to trouble somewhere in the world and say, there you are, that's what goes wrong if religion and politics get mixed up. But I think they're mistaken. I take a very different view. I think the truth is that faith is a very good starting point for politics, because faith in Christ is the source of exactly the values that we need to make politics work. Values like responsibility, solidarity, patience, persistence, compassion, truthfulness. Those are the values that can make politics successful. We need more of them, and I'd like to see more people whose starting point is belief in Jesus, stepping forward, being willing to take on political responsibility and to work with others to change our communities and our country and our world for the better.
And some of the changes you've actually done was helping to ensure that Premier Christian Radio hasn't been kicked off the national digital radio spectrum.
Yes, that's just happened very recently. The organisation that runs the digital radio multiplex, Digital One as it's called, indicated that it didn't want Premier Christian Radio on there anymore. Instead, it wanted yet another pop music station. Most of the stations on there are already pop music stations. I couldn't see any justification for kicking Premier off to make way for yet another pop music station. So I called for and secured what we call an adjournment debate in the House of Commons, where I made the case for Premier Christian Radio to stay on national digital radio. I was very pleased to receive support in that debate from other MPs, and then the Minister, in responding to the debate, agreed with the argument that I had made. And I'm very pleased that since that debate, Premier has been able to reach an agreement with Digital One, and its place on national digital radio looks now to be secure. But that's an example of the kind of thing that we do need to be vigilant about, to make sure that Christians and others can play a full part in national broadcasting, as I think it's very important that they should.
Let's go to education now. Do you have, or does your party have, any alternative plans for tuition fees?
Yes, we think tuition fees are too high at the moment, with the maximum level of £9,000. And Ed Miliband has therefore announced that if Labour is elected on the 7th of May, we will reduce the maximum fee for higher education from £9,000, reduce it by 1/3 down to £6,000. Now, obviously it would be better if we could reduce it further still, but I think that's a very important step and a very welcome step. And something that I've noticed how strongly young people feel about this, that they want to do higher education, of course, they want the opportunities that higher education presents to them, quite rightly, and we want them to undertake higher education if they're able to. But the prospect of doing that and being saddled with a debt of, best part of £30,000 is a pretty worrying prospect for many young people. So we are going to reduce it by 1/3.
Do you have any plans for bursaries?
Well, there are already some bursary arrangements in place. We will encourage those. Some universities have their own arrangements. And of course, there are arrangements that some companies are willing to offer as well, where they will meet the costs of students in higher education with a job with the employer at the end. And we will certainly continue to encourage arrangements of that kind.
Let's look at young people in politics. You organised for Newham Borough, the Borough of Newham, young people last summer and one in February, to give young people an insight into politics. And you're dealing with teenagers, basically. Now, why starting so early?
Well, we set up these politics schools. As you say, I've done them twice. They've been aimed at 16 and 17-year-olds living in Newham. And what I've found is that a lot of young people are really interested in politics, really interested in the big questions about where our society is going to be going over the next 10, 20, 30 years. They're not very impressed by party politics, to be honest. I think they've seen things and read things which do not impress them about the way party politics seems to function. So what I've wanted to do is bring them into Parliament so they can see for themselves, meet the people who are involved in politics, meet the people who are involved with the media, get a first-hand view of what it's like when you're working to change things for the better in your country. And what I've found for the groups who've been so far is tremendous enthusiasm. I think there's enormous potential amongst our young people growing up in churches in this area at the moment, other young people as well, very committed to making things better in the future. And what I want is for them to see that they can make an impact in politics, to get beyond some of the things they read, some of the things that they hear, which give them the impression that politics isn't for them. Just show them the reality and encourage them to think this is something that I could do to make a real positive impact in the future.
Now, why should people vote Labour? What will a Labour government do that a Conservative government hasn't done?
I think the central argument that we'll be making in this election campaign is the Conservative Party view has been that if they look after a few people at the top, everything else will be fine. We're saying Britain isn't going to succeed unless it's run in the interests of the many, not for a few. So ordinary people in Britain over the last few years have had a pretty hard time dealing with a cost of living crisis. We've seen real wages falling over the last 5 years, prices going up. Energy bills went rocketing at one stage, food went up, and people have struggled. And the current government really hasn't recognised that or done anything to help. Labour in government will start from the point of view of the interests of those ordinary people who've had a hard time over the last few years, who want to do well by their children, and a Labour government will be on their side, not just on the side of a few well-off people at the top.
So one more word for people out there who are thinking, well, should I vote Stephen Timms?
Well, I hope that people will. And for my constituents in East Ham, I'm making a case based on my record as an MP over the last 21 years. I aim to be a very accessible MP, to make it easier for people to come and find me and see me when they need to. According to the BBC, I do more constituency surgeries than any MP in London because I want to be available to my constituents. I hope that many people in the area have had a good experience when they've approached me and that I've been able to help with their problems. So on that front, I want to make a case for myself to be re-elected, but I also want to set out Labour's vision for the future. A country which is run in the interests of the many, where young people can look forward to a better future, and where all of us can feel confident that we're going to share in the economic well-being of Britain. Those are the changes that a Labour government will want to make.
Thank you very much, Stephen Timms. Well, viewers, this program is called Talking Politics. Here we aim at highlighting the work MPs and officials have done at their boroughs and in their constituents, and also in the community, the effect of this work on the public and the future plans for the nation. If you've got any questions at all, you can send emails to talkingpolitics@loveltv.co.uk. We've just interviewed the MP for East Ham and the Shadow Minister for Employment, the Right Honourable Stephen Timms. Thank you very much for coming to our studios, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you for having me, Wilmia. I'd be very keen to come back.
In the meantime, enjoy the rest of our programs.